Hey, welcome to the official visit podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. I'm Andrew Greif. This is Tyson Alger. Seated to my right, we're taping this on Friday afternoon. We're talking Ducks football. It's wrapping up signing day, which happened Wednesday. Very exciting as always. Who is going to be coming in for the Ducks next year? All team captains, Tyson.
All team captains.
We were team captains too.
Yeah, I was going to say the only caveat to that is I was a team captain once, so that might not be the biggest bragging point.
Talking Ducks basketball, they are the team of the moment right now. I think, what are they up to right now in RPI?
I believe they're either number 2 or number 3 in RPI. They're number 16 in the country. Pretty impressive stretch they've been on so far.
Yeah, we might delve into fan support a little bit.
Yeah, we could do that.
That was a hot topic today on Twitter. And then we'll get to a little personal news later in the podcast. That's what we call a tease.
A tease.
Folks. So
we'll bury that, though, until like the 20-minute mark.
Yeah. We're not going to actually, who knows? If we get to 20 minutes, I'll be surprised. I want to keep this thing nice and tidy. But let's start off with some football, some signing day. Mm-hmm. That's always a big day. First Wednesday in February. Ducks signed 19. The class is ranked 28th by rivals, a lot lower than at least the fans I talked to on Twitter wanted. Right. But they did meet their needs at quarterback with 3 quarterbacks.
Got some linebackers.
7 potential linebackers. So they met, I guess, their needs very well. I think a lot of people were justified in thinking maybe they could springboard into getting some big-name guys on the heels of all their success in 2014. And last summer they were, I think, at one point the 7th-ranked recruiting class. They had started out so well on the recruiting trail. Mm-hmm. But, decommitments, Vivide, Malapai, down the stretch, went to USC. They kind of struck out on some big-name guys. Who knows if they were really close to even going to Oregon.
Right.
But at least when you're in the running, it makes it seem like you should have a chance to close. So what's your takeaway? I guess when you look at the areas, especially linebacker, which – ever since really Kiko Alonso and Michael Clay left, has been something that a lot of fans have
position of need.
Groused about.
I mean the numbers there are good. Being able to get 7 guys there who all seem to be kind of different molds of athletic ability there. So I think the most interesting thing about that, not necessarily the caliber of the players, because I'm pretty terrible at evaluating high school talent and seeing how it translates out, but. The Ducks are shifting to a new system. It's a 4-3 defensive scheme with Brady Hoke coming in here, so that kind of changes, some of those end types that you'd see in that 3-4 system are shifting back up to that top linebacker spot. So I think it's just as interesting for the guys coming in as it is for some of the guys who have been in the system for the last couple of years and how their roles are going to change.
Yeah, it seems like in the 4-3, you don't have a whole lot of use. And again, I'm not a certified coach, so take this for a grain of salt. But just from what it seems like,
you're wearing the sweater.
Thank you.
Like
it's very
over the collar. Exactly.
I could be a coach right now. I think that maybe there isn't as much use for those kind of tweener linebackers like Deion Jordan when he was so good for Oregon. I think you either have your hand down and you're kind of a defensive end, or you're an outside backer who can move a little more laterally.
Well, that was one of the things Helford said about the actual defensive line. They're going to be a lot more vertical, a lot less kind of like two gap things. It's you're kind of going straight up and down, and then you got the guys out wide, the outside linebackers who kind of take that spot of what you saw kind of like last year or the year before.
There were a couple guys. He mentioned Darian Franklin, who's on campus. He's one of 7 guys who's already on campus from that class. I want to say A.J. Hotchkins and perhaps Hunter Campmoyer, who he kind of said were like true Mike middle linebackers.
Right.
That's just downhill.
I remember watching A.J. Hotchkins play a little bit in high school.
Right?
Tigered. And granted, this is probably such a skewed look because when you have a really good player in Oregon, they're going to stand out because, while this isn't poo-pooing anything about Oregon, but just the quality from the first guy on the roster to the last guy on the roster is going to be a lot different than, say, California or Texas or whatever.
Sure.
So I just remember watching AJ play, and it was just like, oh, man, that guy's a freaking animal out there. Mm-hmm. And obviously he went the junior college route, and it's worked out for him in the long run. So I'm kind of interested to see how he translates. But he definitely has kind of the build of that middle linebacker there.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts just about what Helford said in general on signing day that just piqued your interest or stood out to you?
He was awfully defensive, I thought. And granted, there was a lot of kind kind of a lot of talk heading into that day of how this was a disappointing class for a team that was coming off just a year removed from a national championship appearance and a Heisman thing. And I thought he was most defensive about a couple questions were asked about how quarterbacks are receptive to this program because they've taken graduate transfers the last 2 years, and he very much said that's never come up in the homes that we've been in. A question that might need to be asked is, well, maybe there weren't some homes that you were able to get in because you guys have been doing this, and I don't know if that's true or not, but it just seems that it feels like that he's kind of sensed some of that pressure from the outside on people's opinions on this class.
I tried to ask a kind of a question like that earlier in the press conference about whether the struggles they had this year as a team, not just because of the way they've recruited at quarterback, has hurt the reception at all they've gotten.
Right.
I'm not envisioning doors that were opened because of the Heisman and the title game appearance all of a sudden getting slammed in their face this year because they started 3-3. I mean, they had a very good 6-game win streak to close the season. And if Vernon Adams stays healthy in the Alamo Bowl, we're talking about a completely different end of the season.
Completely.
Probably a top 10 team, and people are on board. There's a ton of momentum. But he said that he sensed that no one was kind of down on the Ducks on the recruiting trail. Again, these are guys they've targeted who have interest in the Ducks, you would think, and want a meeting with them. But still, I'm not on the trail. He is, and he said that he didn't sense at all that people were, put off by the kind of down, quote-unquote, year.
I wonder how much that Alamo Bowl loss still kind of just affects how people even think of this class. So let's say they win the Alamo Bowl, they finish top 10. And let's say they were 27th this year recruiting.
Yeah.
Let's say they're 24th or something. I have a feeling that people are feeling remarkably different about this class because it's just like, Oregon's never had those elite classes before. They're able to take the guys that they get and put them into the system, and they're able to succeed. I think that loss is still kind of hanging over a lot of people's heads of the sky's falling, and all of a sudden we don't have this elite level recruiting class. Funny thing, yesterday when I was covering the basketball game, I had a guy tweeting at me saying, how come Dana Altman's able to get these amazing classes when the football team isn't? And that's the first time I've ever heard anyone say Oregon basketball has been incredible at recruiting. Has nobody watched all these has nobody been watching these transfers come in the last couple of years? And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Vernon Adams was a transfer last year, and I think he worked out pretty well. So I do think there are reasons to be slightly disappointed in the recruiting class just based on the momentum they should have had.
Right.
But overall, I don't think this is something that's going to be killer to the program.
Yeah. I got one guy emailing me all day Wednesday, increasingly hostile throughout the day, and he was actually really nice the next day and emailed me back saying that he had been having some beers and it was out of line, and I was refreshing to hear that because you don't really get apologized to. But what I tried to write to him was that I think you can have it both ways. You can be Oregon and say, look, every year since 2008, with the exception of 2015, but for 7 straight years, their AP finish has beaten their recruiting finish from the previous February, So they do develop guys. They can say that recruiting rankings don't really matter for them, but you can also be a fan. It can also be true that you can be disappointed and think that they could have done better. So I don't think that one is really off base for defending their record, and the other for saying, I think you could have gotten a few more guys or held on to some guys.
I think what it comes down to is it's February. People have been removed from the college football for a month or so. This almost feels like a game sort of thing, and it's just comparing it's the first thing you've been able to do in quite some time where you get to compare yourself against other teams. And obviously Oregon fans are competitive and they want to say they're the best, but this isn't something that Oregon has traditionally dominated in the past. So I don't quite understand the crazy uproar that they've had. And if they had, they had some guys flip, that happens, so.
You got to wait 2 years, I think, 2 or 3 years. I've always thought 3 years to let guys who redshirted get through a year. But look at Jaylen Brown, class of 2014. He was an All-American out of high school. I think he's going to have a really good career, but, he redshirted, and this year there was such a glut of receivers that he never really had a whole lot of chances to prove himself. You just don't know about that guy, but you can't say he's a bust. I just think that it takes time, and so recruiting rankings do usually point toward who's going to be doing better than most. That's the reason why Alabama wins. But, there is a little bit of, okay, now we just let it marinate.
Well, and like something I asked Helfrich, and I worded this question poorly at the time. Like for instance, a lot of times it's the skill position players are like what everyone gets worked up about during recruiting season. It's like, oh, it's the number one running back or quarterback, whatever.
Right.
The Ducks lost a pretty good running back during this thing, but they have about 4 or 5 running backs as it is right now who have shown that they can produce at this level, and it's certain of those sexy positions the Ducks have strength at already. They don't really need any more wide receivers right now. They don't need any more running backs. And while you don't ever want to stop kind of accumulating those, like those aren't necessarily positions that they needed this year, and they addressed the quarterback situation. And granted, I don't know if any of those guys are going to turn out or not. I think Prukop's going to be pretty good this year, and then they picked up linebackers. So I mean, wasn't a sexy class, but they addressed what they thought were their needs.
One thing Helfrich didn't really address, Thomas Tyner, the running back.
Yeah.
Awfully, I don't know about his health, but he was asked questions about Tyner's health, like will he be ready by spring ball? The question was asked with the assumption that Tyner will be back. I don't necessarily know that that's an assumption people should completely make.
Yeah. The frustrating thing about Tyner is, so there was the big thing last year when he was injured, and then his name was left off the roster, and then people started running with that, and then Helfrich kind of got pretty ticked off about kind of the speculation about Tyner, and they
didn't leave Braylon Addison off the roster when he was hurt for the whole year, the year before.
Exactly, and,
for fall camp anyway.
And some of the guys who have been injured in the past, like you've seen around the team a bunch, and Tyner's been, and granted, you don't see any of the behind the scenes stuff, so I'm not saying, but like just he's been not visible at all from the outside perspective, and
staffers have told us that too.
Yeah, and it's we're not purposely vague, but when the coaches are vague about the situation, knowing especially when it's a hot topic like Tyner, like they can quell that by saying, hey, Thomas Tyner's like on our roster, like he's still recovering from this, like like Helfrich kind of came out and said something like, oh, like if it's not a season or career-ending injury, we kind of stay away from that. But it was a season-ending injury last year, and I mean it's a shoulder surgery, and it's been about 9 months. Like I think you'd have an update on that.
Yeah. So as always, an off-season full of intrigue.
Yeah.
I'm writing a story today about kind of the biggest off-season questions. One of them is finding a serviceable backup quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the odds-on favorite is Prukop wins the job.
And then Travis Johnson as the backup?
Someone needs to be, more consistent than Jeff Locke and Taylor Alley were this year.
Yeah.
Guys who have all the respect from teammates and coaches for their knowledge of the playbook, but they looked a little bit like deer in the headlights this year when they played. And so I think that you just need someone who can come in and get you a win.
Yeah.
And not that they won at Colorado together. They
barely
beat Georgia State. I think they should have beaten Washington State, and I don't know if that was necessarily their fault, but they just need guys who can put you over the top and be dynamic as a backup too.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. I want to see. I think that obviously how does the new 4-3 work?
Right.
The comfort level, and that's something that we won't know till September.
Who's going to play center?
Right. I think that job will be Jake Hansen's. Gotten a ton of love from guys like Tyler Johnstone.
Mm-hmm.
I think he can be a 4-year starter, kind of like Hronis Grasu. But, yeah, it's a huge one.
Especially after that Alamo Bowl.
Yeah.
That was...
I go back also to the back end, to the defensive backfield.
Yeah, great.
Everyone knew this year was going to be rough. I don't know if people were prepared for it to be as rough stats-wise as it was for passing yards allowed. But you kind of hope with the defensive secondary that young that year 2 begets improvement, which begets improvement for year 3, etc.
Yeah.
And it just, you start to grow.
Yeah, I'd be interested in finding out the difference between talent and inexperience from last year, whether or not last year was solely based on just inexperience, or maybe there wasn't the right guys in there.
Yeah. So, and they're going to be down Glenn Iannacho, who's leaving the program along with Morgan Mahalik.
Right.
Mahalik was written on the wall. You could see that
right.
coming from about a mile away in early January.
I mean,
Iannacho didn't play a whole lot. That was a little bit of a surprise.
Going back to that Colorado game, that's kind of when I sensed the writing on the wall with Mahalik was, Adams was hurt that game. Taylor and Jeff were both struggling, and after that we asked Telfrich if Mahalik was going to be the third option there, or if they were to put in an injured Adams, and he was like, good question.
Yeah.
I was just like, ooh, that's not a very good vote of confidence right there.
Yeah. Okay, let's pivot.
Pivot.
No pun intended, or maybe was it for a basketball reference. Let's go to some hoops, because you're covering the hoops fully throughout. You've been dialed in on this team ever since the bowl game.
Dialed
in.
Yeah.
What is the most surprising thing about this team's success?
Surprising thing about this team's success? I think it's two things. I think it's the fact that they're able to have a go-to scoring option, even though it changes every game a year after Joseph Young departs.
Yeah, it's complete.
Every game they have a guy that has about 5 or 6 points more than anybody else on the team. Like, they have the hot shooter for the game.
Yeah.
But unlike last year, where you could pencil Joseph Young in for in between 20 and 30 points, and everyone else kind of in the teens. You're having a guy like Dylan Brooks who will go off for 25. The next night, Chris Boucher could go off for 25, and the next night, Tyler Dorsey or Elgin Cook. So you're still getting that production, but it comes in waves depending on who the hot hand is. And lately, it's been Dylan Brooks. But with this team, I have no idea if that's going to stay that way, because they're just incredibly balanced with that scoring. But I think the most impressive turnaround has been defensively. Last year, the Ducks were just a really bad defensive team. It seemed like they didn't quite know what they were even doing on the defensive end until about March came around, when they kind of had to win all those games. But if you go look on KenPom, the Ducks are in the top. I believe they're one of the top 25 teams defensively, which last year they were one of the worst teams in the league defensively. They just kind of survived on that kind of up-tempo offense. And so I think having Chris Boucher back there anchoring kind of in the paint has been huge for them, but also just they're tall and athletic, and they all hustle back there, which is kind of really tough for teams, especially when they get into that zone. I mean, they have so much reach that it's kind of hard to get through that thing.
Okay, they didn't need it last night because they smothered Colorado at home. But when it's Pac-12 tournament time, NCAA tournament time, who are they going to give the ball to needing a bucket in the final 90 seconds of a game? Or is it the case that they're even better because as an opposing team you can't predict who it'll go to?
They are balanced like that, but I think over the last 3 or 4 weeks you've seen that Brooks is kind of the guy. He's one of him and Dorsey are the two best at the team at creating their own shot.
Sure.
But Brooks has kind of a tenacity, and when he puts his head down and decides to go to the hole, he's going there, or he's going to get that shot off. And I think he's playing with the most confidence on the team. A guy like Elgin Cook is always confident, but he just doesn't quite have the all-around skill set that some of the other guys do to be able to do that. So I think Brooks is probably that guy in those situations.
This is a good segue into a reader question on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
Mark Grandy, at Mark Grandy, said, what are the chances Dylan Brooks and or Tyler Dorsey declare for the NBA draft?
Good question, because you and I were just talking about this earlier. I think if Brooks would have started the year like he's played like the last couple weeks, there's a chance. But I think he's still, while he's playing much better than he was last year, I think he's still relatively raw.
He feels that way.
The guy is incredibly talented, but it just seems like if he gets one more year kind of just playing in a system, developing his skills, and the fact that he's pretty much playing with a new body too. If you watch him last year compared to this year, he shed a whole bunch of weight, added muscle, and I was talking to somebody on the press row yesterday. I've never seen a more talented player who makes it look so hard than Dylan Brooks.
That's actually a really good, yeah.
Yeah, because nothing he does looks smooth. I mean, he gets it done nearly every time, but it never looks smooth. And I think if he can just kind of find that comfort zone a little bit, he could work himself into there. And same with I think Dorsey could definitely use another year. I think if you were to grade talent and potential, he's probably higher than Brooks, maybe in terms of NBA grades, but I think he's kind of hit the freshman wall here a little bit and hasn't quite shown enough to make an NBA team say, hey, I want to take a chance on that guy this early. So if that being the case and those two guys happen to come back, and let's say you get either Boucher or Ennis to come back next year because they're both appealing the NCAA to come back to get eligibility for another year. This season could potentially just be the setup for next year's season for the Ducks, because you have another good recruiting class coming in. Peyton Pritchard's coming in to kind of shore up the guard position, which I think is the most important thing for the Ducks right now, because Kendall Small hasn't been reliable enough to work his way into the rotation, and the Ducks are pretty short on depth. I think that's going to be their biggest problem going forward, is when they're playing against some of these teams and they're getting in foul trouble. Brooks had 4 fouls last night, and thankfully they didn't really need him down the stretch. But there's just not a whole lot coming off that bench, especially after like Trevor Manuel transferred earlier in the year, which I think might have ended up being like one of the most ill-advised transfers, if in fact he transferred because of playing time.
Yeah.
Because right after he transfers, you have Ennis leaves. He'd be playing a lot right now if he hadn't transferred.
You brought up Boucher. I think he might be the most intriguing prospect for the pros.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? He's still a rail thin,
Yeah.
but just he can shoot threes. He had, 9 blocks in a game this year? I mean,
the Ducks are halfway through Pac-12 play, and he has 72 blocks already on the season, which is easily on pace to break Jordan Bell's single-season record. He set it last year of, I think, 96. But the difference between Bell and Boucher is Boucher's a fully formed offensive threat as well.
Sure.
You saw it against Arizona State. I think he went for 26 points. He had 4 or 5 threes. And this is a guy who's only been playing basketball for about 3 or 4 years now.
That's incredible.
If I'm an NBA executive, I look at that guy and be like, okay, I think we can do something with this guy.
Sure. Okay, another question from @GreekFreak23. This Oregon team has all the pieces, do something special. How far do you think they'll get in the tourney? And let me add an addendum to that real quick. How far do you think they'll get in the tourney? What's the one thing about this team that could push them further and further? And what's maybe the one weakness that could hold them back?
Okay. I kind of harkening back to what we were just talking about. I think the weakness is depth.
Yeah.
You have Jordan Bell and Dwayne Benjamin coming off the bench, but those are really the only 2 guys, reliable guys coming off of there, and they're both kind of tall, bigger guys. Thankfully, Casey Benson doesn't really get into foul trouble that often, so you don't really need a whole bunch of kind of typical guards coming off, but just if another player gets injured or if somebody misses a stretch for something, that could really kind of hamper them. But going into the tournament, I think what makes them a potentially really good tournament team is this isn't a team that hurts themselves.
How many turnovers they have against Arizona? Like 4?
They had like 4. They had 6 last night.
Yeah.
The Ducks just don't turn the ball over. Haltman's been preaching this year. They call it the simple play sort of thing, and it works. This is a talented team that kind of plays its style, and they don't do enough. Basically, if you want to beat Oregon, you're going to have to beat them by beating them. The Ducks, unlike last year, they're not going to really throw games away. Even if they come out and have a poor shooting night like they did last. The Ducks didn't play great offensively last night, but playing aggressive on defense and not throwing the ball away, I think, makes them at least. I think they're a viable Sweet 16 option with potential to go a little bit further than that. I don't think they're in danger of getting into like national title conversation, but if they get hot at the right time, I think an Elite 8 isn't out of the question.
I think I saw yesterday a Las Vegas casino always sends out sports odds, Bovada. I think Oregon's was like 100-1 to win the title. Mm-hmm. So, if you really want to, put your money down on them. But
I mean, teams can get hot. I just don't. If they can bring this quarterback next year, potentially. But I think this will be a big kind of learning experience for a lot of those guys. And making the tournament last year and playing up against Wisconsin again, I think was a big thing for some of these guys too. But it's been an interesting year. And one thing that Altman's kind of been preaching this year, or that's not the right word, but just in terms of like the Pac-12's visibility, he says he's been kind of going off about, the Pac-12 is better than it's been ever this year, but we're probably less visible because we don't have that elite team. Arizona's down. And
sure.
We were asking him last night, it's like, you guys could potentially be that elite team, and you know how Altman is. He's never going to. Yeah. But he kind of brought up the same things. He said they're not consistent enough right now, and he says he doesn't think they're tough enough right now to be considered that elite team. He says he thinks they could potentially get there. Yeah. I asked him if he would ever actually admit it, and he said maybe, but we'll see.
We're just going to leave this here because you've written about it extensively in December. And attendance is up a little bit from last year. About 6,800 people are watching games. That's 67th most in Pac-12. In the country this year, home attendance. But that's only 54.6% of Matthew Knight Arena's capacity. That's 136th in the country. That's not what you want,
right,
and what you might expect for a team this good. I wonder if maybe how many home games they have left? Like 4?
They have 4 left, and one thing, unfortunately for them, the schedule makers didn't do them any favors because Sunday they have Utah, which would traditionally be a very well attended game. Last year, that was their biggest attendance.
Yeah,
I believe they had 10-5 there last year, but they scheduled it an hour and a half before the Super Bowl. I don't think many people are going to be venturing out of their way unless they were already planning on going to that game. So that's kind of a shot in the hip for them.
Sure. Well, the Ducks seem to be, I don't know, whether the fans are out there or not, they're playing pretty well. So.
Yeah. But they did sell out the Civil War coming up in 2 weeks. So, I mean, attendance has been noticeably better this year, but for what the program is right now, the program I don't think has caught up to the level of play on the court in terms of just the overall aura around the program and interest and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and ticket prices were cut pretty considerably, I thought, this year, but still doesn't seem to be a huge lure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I don't think they necessarily thought it was going to be a overnight change thing. I think the important thing is they've kind of at least acknowledged that there was a problem last year, and they made some changes that may be working, might not be working, but
yeah,
we'll see how it works because it's a really good product on the court right now, and not enough people are going out to see it.
Well, Tyson, this might be our last Ducks podcast for a minute or two.
A hot minute.
Yeah, because I am taking on a slightly different role here.
Really?
At the Oregonian. Oh, we haven't told you yet?
No.
Oh, okay. You're going to be by yourself for the next 6 months.
Oh, sorry.
Let's make sure that audio is crystal clear for the fans at home.
Yeah.
I am, Tyson, from now on, after signing day, I'm going to be an enterprise, what we call an enterprise reporter. So I am going to cover, quote-unquote, bigger stories from everything from preps to the pros. I can write about whatever I want. So whether that's kind of...
That sounds terrible.
About the Blazers, what the bigger story about why they're doing better than expected, or...
Why are they doing better than expected?
Well, I haven't started doing that reporting yet.
Okay, well, maybe you should.
Because kind of... Not quite necessarily investigations, but I'll spend maybe a couple weeks on a story, and so I'll come back to football coverage in July, around time media days heats up, and until then, I'll still be checking in with the Ducks, I think, quite a bit. Like, it's still what I'm going to be writing about all fall.
Nope.
But Tyson is going to be...
You're not touching it.
The number one. He's going to be the go-to de facto guy for everything football and basketball. I'm not going to be covering baseball this spring. You aren't. But everything else, you're the number one turn to. So the beat will be in excellent Alaskan hands. So I think that I'll still be around people, but just maybe not as often around the Ducks.
You guys are giving me this power, and then you're going to come back in July, and there's not going to be a football team anymore. I just destroyed everything.
So
no, it should be a fun couple months. I'm excited for you to kind of get to branch out and do some other things, and I'm excited to kind of increase what I've been doing on the football end. So
totally,
and hopefully the Ducks don't make the national title game for basketball, or else we might be juggling a little spring football action.
Yeah, that could be dangerous. But we'll see what happens there. Either way, we're both still going to be writing about the Ducks in some capacity.
I think we'll still have you come do the pod if you don't mind every once in a while.
I'd be honored.
Okay.
Thank you.
We might have to Photoshop your face out of the art.
Well, thank you for listening, everybody. And we will be back at some point talking about probably Ducks basketball for the next good little bit because of the streak they're on.
Yeah, maybe we'll check in before a Pac-12 tournament or so.
Let's make it a date.
Okay.
I'll mark it on my calendar. Okay.
I'll bring wine.
You can follow us on Twitter at Andrew Greif, at Tyson Alger. Did you just say you're going to bring wine?
No.
Our stuff can be read in the pages of the Oregonian. Buy a printed copy, help underwrite our salaries, or OregonLive.com/ducks. And we will talk to you in the future.